Welcome back. We hope you've enjoyed your week of birding. We're always excited to get examples of what you're seeing in and around your communities, and you had many fantastic questions this week. So join us as we try to dive deeper into some of those questions.
I loved reading all of your curious questions about bird calls. So one of the questions was, why do birds have calls? Well, just like you and I use language to communicate with each other, birds have their own language to communicate with each other, and that is their calls or their songs. So some reasons why birds may call out is to get attention of another bird, or they may be calling to defend their territory, to stay safe from predators that may be coming around, or to let other birds in the area know that there's some predators or dangers around. Another reason they might have a call or use a bird song is to attract a mate. Especially this time of year, we're hearing lots of those bird songs. One specific question was about the chickadee and how they have the chickadee-dee-dee call, and they may add more D's at the end to indicate a greater threat. So if you heard just a chickadee-dee, chickadee-dee, it may not be that alarming. But if a chickadee wanted to indicate that there was danger in the area, it may be more of an alarming call, like chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee.
You had some amazing questions about woodpeckers and how they protect themselves. Remember how they bang their heads against the tree? And if we banged our head like that, it would really hurt our brains. Well, woodpeckers have an amazing adaptation where they can take their tongue, which is abnormally long, and wrap it around their brain in order to cushion it from the banging that happens when it's hitting the tree. It also has a tighter cavity or a tighter skull, so there's not as much space around their brain as there are in our heads. I want you to do something for me. Stick out your tongue. How far can you stick out your tongue? Is it 2.5 times the length of your nose? Because that's how long a woodpecker's tongue is. 2.5 times the length of its beak. That's really crazy. But because it's so long, that's why it can wrap it around its brain and protect it so it doesn't hurt itself while it's banging its head against the tree. Pretty cool survival strategy, don't you think?
Some of you had questions about our corvids, about the crows and the ravens, and I want to address those now. One of the questions had to do with why they go in those large communal flocks at night, the roost where they actually spend the night, that I mentioned could be, here in Ottawa, 10,000 birds. In some places, it can be 1 million birds or more. And the thinking is that there is protection or safety in those numbers, but also that they share a lot of information, because when they spread out for the day, they're looking for food sources. And so there's a lot of socialization and communication that happens in that mass at night. And it certainly makes it difficult for predators to try to get in there and get any individual bird. You also asked about the calls of the birds and how they learn to do them. We know that crows, for example, have more than 20 regular calls that they use and are capable of learning to imitate almost anything they hear in their environment. Human voice, a doorbell, a car beeping sound. And they use these calls to communicate different information. Remember, they're among the smartest birds that we are aware of, and really it's a guess often as to what exactly they're saying.
Did you hear that sound of the woodpecker? Now, that's most likely a downy woodpecker drumming for a mate because it's spring. But I wanted to give you a little bit more information about the yellow-bellied sapsucker. So I don't know if you can see how tiny these holes are, but some of you wondered why they were so small. Now, the yellow-bellied sapsucker is a smaller woodpecker and has a shorter beak, so it doesn't need to make a very deep hole. The holes they make are only deep enough to get through the outer bark, through the phloem, and into the xylem. That's kind of the living portion of the tree where the sap is flowing. So the holes are small enough that it can capture just enough sap so that tiny insects can get caught in those little holes, so that when the sapsucker comes back, they can just pick the insects out and maybe drink a little bit of the sap as well. The name yellow-bellied sapsucker might lead you to believe that it has a bright yellow belly, but it's actually just tinged in yellow, but it's enough to distinguish it from other woodpeckers that don't have the yellow belly.
We had lots of questions about owls, and the first one was, do owls smell? And as we talked about in the video before, they really depend on their sense of vision and their hearing in order to locate their prey. So those senses are much more developed in owls than their sense of smell. They don't really need that for their own survival. The second question that we had was, what is the most common owl to be found here in the Ottawa region? Now, from my own experience, I would say the barred owl. And when I did some research to find out exactly which one is most common, that's what came up in bird surveys and some citizen science projects. Those seem to be the species that are seen most here in the Ottawa region and across the province of Ontario. So keep your eyes out for those owls, and also the sound, who cooks for you? The last question we had was if owls have predators. We know that owls themselves are predators. They eat other animals, but do they actually get eaten by other animals? So it's a bit of a complicated question. Their young or their eggs are definitely preyed upon by other animals. Raccoons, foxes, all sorts of animals will definitely eat their eggs or their young, the baby owls, if they aren't well protected or in a safe nesting area. But the adult owls sometimes can also be eaten as well. They may be eaten by another owl, like a great horned owl or a snowy owl, some of the bigger species. This isn't often going to happen because the owl wants to eat the other owl for meat. Usually it's a territorial encounter. So one owl might be competing with another owl species for a certain area, a forest with only so many resources or food items there. So in that case, two owls might fight over that territory. And if one owl dies, the other owl isn't going to let that food go to waste. Humans are probably the number one predator of owls. We have a lot of human impacts that are affecting owl species around the world. And so just like other birds, our cars and windows on buildings cause issues for owls that can cause death. And also as we expand our cities, owls might have to get into more territorial fights with other owls as they compete for the resources that are left behind.
A lot of you seem familiar with the blackbirds and the bluebirds that I mentioned, but there was another bird that many of you brought up that we did not talk about last time, and that is a redbird. I'm guessing that you can figure out what that is by just saying the color. The northern cardinal is a beautiful redbird that is actually here all winter. It doesn't migrate, and you can find it around, especially if you have feeders in your yard. It tends to be quite common on the forest edge and in yards and city parks. So if we take a close look at the cardinal, it's another bird that is rarely mistaken for a different kind of a bird. So you can see here the northern cardinal is completely red. Even its bill is red. It's very thick on the end there, but it's reddish orange. It has that red crest on the top of its head, and it has that distinct black mask and bib on its face. When we look at the female, we see only a slight change to a kind of a brownish gray color for most of her body, but her wings and her tail are still that red color, and the crest is still present. Now, if you live in the city and there are hedges nearby or bushes that are dense, there are some cedar hedges near where I live that the cardinals nest in every year. And they tend to nest pretty low to the ground, so about my height, maybe 5 or 6 feet off the ground, and in real thick, dense brambles of branches. So if you see them heading into a bush and sort of disappearing and getting silent all of a sudden, then it's a good chance that they're nesting in there. The songs and calls of the cardinals are very distinct also, and you might hear these sounds before you even spot them. So if you hear this typical cardinal song, start to look around, try to pinpoint it. You're likely to find them at the very top of a tree announcing their territory. the males are very, very territorial, and they will chase other males out of their territory very aggressively. In fact, they're well known to even chase and attack their reflection. So it's common for people to notice them looking in the mirror on a car or seeing themselves in a window reflection and just pecking at it, trying to attack that invader to their territory. So as you continue your birding into spring, keep your eyes and ears open for the northern cardinal in your neighborhood.
We hope we've been able to answer some of the things that you were wondering about the lives of birds in your community. I've also been paying more attention to the birds in and around my house this week, and here's what I've been feeding at my feeder. You'll notice that one of these birds is not like all the others. In my backyard feeder, we have an albino turkey that's been feeding underneath the feeder this week. So that's what I've gotten to observe and watch as the week's gone on. Now, I encourage you to keep watching birds in your neighborhood and in your backyard feeders as we progress through the spring. Many of those migrating birds are going to be returning to the Ottawa area, so the birds at your feeder may change over the next few weeks. So keep your eyes open for some new species of birds that you can learn about and record. Speaking of spring, our next video is going to highlight one of the very exciting things that happens here at the centers in the spring, and that has to do with tapping our maple trees. Join us for our next video so that you can learn how we tap our maple trees for sap and process it into sweet, sugary maple syrup.